Today I've got 3 more jobs to do on my trusty T5 van. Now this little thing is over 20 years old and it still pulls like a train and goes way faster than the law will allow, but it always seems to have issues that need fixing. Currently the suspension is making rather disconcerting clunking noises even over a seemingly smooth road surface. Also, my outdated FM stereo is really struggling to find a station I can actually listen to and mostly just hisses. And let's face it, most of my favourite music is now on my phone rather than on CDs. Unfortunately, being 20 years old, this van has very few mod cons, like a sat nav or a reversing camera, and although it does have electric rather than keep fit windows, cracking open the window on the passenger side is actually much noisier than on the driver's side. Thanks to a missing wind deflector that just blew off in a storm. Thankfully, my good friends at eBay have got my back, and I can order everything on my mobile phone. By using eBay Assured Fit, I can actually enter my vehicle details, which eBay kindly remembers in my garage, and then all the parts that fit that vehicle will show up. That big screen sat nav and stereo looks perfect, and the green tick or check mark shows it's an assured fit. But if it doesn't fit, I can return it for free within 30 days and get a full refund. Now, until the 30th of November, eBay also have an offer of 20% off tuning and styling parts, which I'm definitely going to take advantage of to replace that missing wind deflector and fix that tired, clunky suspension. If you haven't already seen eBay's content, I went to Goodwood Festival of Speed and indulged in a ride-along with the legend that is Richard Hammond. What would be your car restoration approach in 3 minutes?
Leave more time.
That's brilliant.
What do you feel is your craziest, just for fun invention?
It's got to be the sofa car. It's mid-engine, so technically a sports car. Seats 3, there we go. Hammond. And you can see more of that content if you click the link. Right then, I better get back to the workshop and get the van on the ramp before those parts arrive. So 3 jobs to zhuzh up our tired old T5 Volkswagen van. We've got obviously a new stereo system from the eBay Assured Fit, so it's definitely going to fit. It comes with loads of extra features, which we'll get to a little bit later on. And then from the tuning and styling section, we've got our new wind deflectors in a nice kind of shiny black, and also this adjustable street suspension. It's in orange, obviously, but it should be relatively easy to fit. I'm hoping everything's just going to unbolt. I'm just going to be able to chuck it back in place. But I think just to start things off, I'm going to start with the rear suspension. Now, before I do anything, particularly take anything apart, I'm just going to get a datum for all the suspension heights around the vehicle, just because then, obviously, when we come to putting on the adjustable suspension, we can kind of set it either at stock or in the weeds. But I want to know what it is at the moment, so looking at that, really scientific. Looks like about 130 mil, 13 centimetres to me, give or take. I'll check all the corners, and at least that way we know exactly where we're supposed to be. I've gone for the rear because it's a lot easier than the front, and you can see it's just basically a shock absorber and a spring, and basically the spring is kind of held in by the shock absorber because obviously this whole arm is just going to swing on that pivot point there. First thing, lots of penetrating fluid though. So much easier. Wonderful. Right, then we've got our old suspension here, I've got our new suspension. You can see they're already quite obviously different. Now obviously this kit is designed for kind of lowering the van a little bit so we can go right into the weeds if we want to, but I think it is actually going to be slightly shorter. You can tell that just by looking at our shock absorbers. You can see they're clearly different heights. So obviously this is also gas filled, so they're naturally going to expand to their full length. So the van is definitely going to sit lower than it did to start with. It's going to be sort of kind of a hot rod thing. It might be difficult to get over bumps, but we'll see how we go. It won't be that crazy low. It's just going to be kind of street low, which is rather nice. Now, while talking about the shock absorbers, you can see we've got some issues here. Obviously there's some rust, there's some corrosion. I mean, there's no leakage, there's no kind of misting of gas. So obviously they were still working, which is all right. But obviously the rubber bits, if you look on the end here, if I just do a little bit of movement there, you can see that the screwdriver actually is not needing a lot of force to actually make those move, whereas the new ones are much firmer. So that might have been why the thing was sort of moving around a little bit, maybe where some of the clunking was coming from. But essentially that's going to be a straight swap. That's going to be nice and easy. When it comes to the springs, you can see they are markedly different. First of all, you can see that the rubber on the top of here is very perished. And of course, this is what isolates the sound of the movement of the suspension from the interior of the van. So I suspect that perhaps where this was sort of bearing or going onto the bare metal, there might have to be where some of the clunking was coming from, certainly from the rear of the vehicle. So I need to get some more of these. So I have to make sure I get some of those in. But also the main thing you can see is that when you put the springs next to each other, that actually they're a very different height. And obviously the whole point of that is we have these little adjusters here. They're going to sit like so. In fact, they're going to have a little rubber isolator in there again to stop some of that noise. But even there, you can see they are slightly lower, which of course, again, we expect because we're going to be lowering the suspension. But the main thing is the different number of coils. So you can see there's actually, well, 1, 2, 3 main coils here, basically 1, 2 there. So obviously it's like a third less. Now obviously the more coils you have, the softer the suspension is, which is why the metal here is also a bit thicker in diameter, because of course that's going to resist that softness. So theoretically these are probably going to have about the same spring rate. It also depends on the alloy of the steel that's actually used, the spring steel itself, obviously the diameter, number of coils, and of course the overall length in the end. And therefore the preload is going to be done by winding up these little things here, so I have those special spanners for. And again, as I said, that's why I measured it before at the beginning, because when I lower it down at the end, I'm then going to get the height just how I want it. I'll probably start pretty much on maximum to see how that feels, and then we can always go lower if we want to. Right then, so very simple stuff. I can just reassemble bits and pieces. So what's going to happen is I'm going to have one of these sort of rubber sort of bit goes over here, and that's going to sit theoretically on there, and then the spring is going to sit there like so. So that's going to then stop that making a noise, and this is actually going to go up the other way. So what we're going to have is we need to get some new ones of these bits of rubber that sit on there, and then we're going to flip that up the other way, and then we're going to put those little caps on. And I have noticed actually that there's a little kind of a bounce bar. So even if this was all kind of very soft and kind of crunched together, there is the sort of like the bump stop, if you like, is inside the little collar there just on the suspension, or coming from the body of the van. But there's a little lip where it's been kind of pressed together, and unfortunately the diameter here is just big enough to go over the actual cylinder, but it seems we're going to have to maybe machine off a little bit. I'll say machine off, I'm going to use an angle grinder, let's be honest. So I'm going to grind off a little bit of that material, repaint it, and then I guess I can then slide these into position properly. So I've got a little bit more work to do, but I'm going to need all these parts in. So while those turn up, I might turn my attention to the dashboard and actually have a look at that stereo and see what we need to do there. Right then, so to our stereo changeover. Now obviously the part I've bought is an eBay assured fit part, so it's guaranteed to fit, or I get my money back if I send it back in 30 days, which is fab. Now this particular stereo, and it was quite good at the time, obviously it is an aftermarket fitment. I don't really need to put my CDs anymore, frankly, all my music is on my phone, so definitely has to go. Now obviously it's been in there a long time, it's been beaten up a bit, we've taken the dashboard apart I don't know how many times just to sort out the AC, so I think theoretically with a little bit of wiggle waggle, you don't even need the little keys, you can just take this thing apart. So actually getting it out is really not that much of an issue, but you can see there's a lot of wiring in here. Now it's partly because I had some kind of hands-free device in here at one point. I don't know how much of this is original, I don't know how much of this is extra. There's a few bits that are a little bit short. We may have to take out the glove box here to get to more of the wires. But I think on the whole, the stuff I'm really worried about is probably going to be these two little chaps here. They look like the standard Volkswagen connectors. So I think probably there should be either a wiring loom in there. I have ordered a spare one, but that isn't here yet, just in case. But there is like a little connector that's going to go from here to the other stereo. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make a little bit of a note, or I'm certainly going to keep this close by so I can actually check. They very kindly sent me a little sort of wiring diagram of what I might have to swap over just in case I want to get busy with a soldering iron or whatever. I'm just trying to connect these up the correct way. So first of all, what I want to do is just trying to see if I can get this thing to fit. But essentially, it really was as easy as that to actually remove our stereo. I just disconnect these plugs and then hopefully, should. There's one. There's two. Okay, so that is obviously the wiring for the stereo. We've got our aerial here, which frankly, I don't know if we're going to be using that again on the new one. It doesn't, even if it has a connection for FM, it might do. And then of course we've got also a wire here, which I'm not sure what that's for. That might be some kind of muting thing, and as I say, it seems a bit taut. So I suspect it might go to a module that's inside here, so I might even take this apart yet. But anyway, we're getting there. So now once this is actually all the way out, we can then start having a look at the wiring and see what's going on. Right then, well this is obviously our original stereo with all the wires coming out the back. Of course you've got like an adapter if you like to go from the wiring for the stereo to the VW standard wiring. I've got much the same thing coming in the post as we speak for this unit, so it'll be a nice plug and play item. We've also got DAB Plus unit coming as well. That'll plug into the back here, so I'll get DAB radio, which would be much better than the hiss that I'm getting from my no longer being used FM sort of circuits on that old stereo. We've also got loads of other really interesting functions. So you've got things like, obviously, if you want to have a little MP3 player, got a little USB connector right there. We've actually got a reversing camera, which is quite exciting. So I'm now actually going to be able to line up with the trailer tow bar much more easily. I've got no idea where I'm going to fit it yet exactly, because I've got barn doors. So there's no obvious place to put that, but I'll get to that in a little bit later on. I'll make sure it works first. We've got GPS little module here as well. So of course that plugs into the back. So then when you have your either Apple or Android sort of connectivity, then you can have satellite navigation and obviously not get lost, which would be also a big plus, because it's much better than just trying to have a phone balanced on the dashboard, which is probably not entirely legal anyway. We've got some connectors here as well for all your stereo stuff. So if you've got like a really big sort of stereo in there, an amp or whatever it is, then that's going to connect up to that as well. We've got a hands-free microphone, which is also very helpful. So we've got a lot of extra bits that are going to make our van much easier to live in the cabin area. But obviously you've got to fit it to the dashboard. Now, it comes with a bezel and these little brackets here, which is fine, but I actually think it's going to look neater without that. So even though it's not quite as it's designed, I mean, I could possibly get hold of one of these kind of double DIN connectors and connect that onto the back. It's actually got bolting points on the sides. You can see just here and here, so I could absolutely bolt it onto that. So that is definitely one option, but I think I might even go cleverer than that. So I've just modified the bezel that comes off very easily off the van just for some 4 holes, because there's also 4 holes on the back of here to bolt on. It's obviously designed to fit in all kinds of different vehicles, and I think this is going to be the tidiest way to go. So the first thing you do is I'll bolt this onto there while the wiring turns up, and then hopefully we can start carrying on with the other bits and pieces. This should be really nice and strong, and it is, which is fab. And of course, once it's actually in the van, it's actually held onto the dashboard in multiple points. They all kind of snap fit, so it's going to be held very securely indeed. But doesn't it look smart? Look at that, it looks fantastic. So this is going to be a really lovely addition to the van, but of course I can't actually install it until I've got the rest of the wiring loom. Oh, well that's kind of handy. Look at that, I've got my rubbers for the suspension. So I'll go and fit the back suspension onto the car. Right then, so those new little bits of suspension are here, which is great. You can see that it's obviously well worth changing. It's a marked improvement on the top, but then on the bottom, again, I mean, this probably would have been fine. As you can see, it is just rust on the back there's no issues at all, but it's just nice to have a new bit so we know it's all lovely, shiny and new. Only thing I'm a bit worried about is just on the bottom of there, you can see, obviously these little dimples here are designed to go on the bottom of the spring. So I think they're just going to take a bit of persuasion to get in. But that's it, that's fine. So yeah, once the spring's in place and it's all kind of loaded up, there'll be no problems at all. So let's get it on the van and see what it looks like. Now this little chap here actually locates in the little dimple down there on the metal, so I might as well put that in first, then I can pop that in place because that's also got a little dimple. And look at the socket, there you go, like so. And then this chap should have enough room, probably. I do one before the other. And then we're kind of good to go. Of course now we just have the small matter of actually putting the shock absorber in place and then lifting the whole thing up. So I'll just kind of set the other side of the soil and then that way they can go together. Well, my new springs and dampers fit perfectly, so now I have an adjustable rear suspension on the van, which is brilliant. Also looks a bit more purposeful, which is also rather nice. Maybe it's going to even handle a bit better as well. Now I have noticed while I'm down here that perhaps in the future I might have to look at a new exhaust system, but do we keep it stock or go for an upgrade in some way? Let me know in the comments. I think either way, the exhaust is a job for another day. So when it comes to fitting our adjustable front suspension, let's hope it's as easy as it was on the rear. Of course it's not as simple as the rears. Oh my word, right, okay. Right then, that could have been a lot worse, but I think I found another squeak and another rattle. So clearly what I need to do is change the drop links because of course I think the ball joints are probably a bit shot on that, but also as are the rubber joints as well. Now, I don't want to do a full suspension refurb, but while I'm here, while I'm finding things that are wrong with it, obviously to get rid of the squeaks and the bumps and the clunks, that'll be the best way to go. So I'll put that on the list of things to order. Okay, so now all we have to do is just undo these little chaps here and everything will be wonderful. I bet they're going to be a bit of a pain. In fact, I think I might try and just get a little tap on there or something, maybe just a bit of a brush, just to clean off the threads, because of course if you're trying to grab dirt all the way through, it can be a problem. Better. A bit more fluid just to be on the safe side. Might need a bigger bar. Well, it's been in there a while. Definitely a lot easier than undoing those. So that's why you need obviously to undo those two bolts, because it makes it a lot harder to get this off, but obviously with the help of the chain that makes it possible. But then I am finding that even though I've got a bit more movement here, I haven't got enough really to actually undo it, so I'm just going to undo the steering as well. That sounds like we may have a result. Fab. So that is now out of the way. So now we can undo this from above and get it onto a spring compressor. I think that's the bearing. Yeah, it really doesn't feel very good, doesn't sound very good. It's got a lot of sort of slop in it as well. So I think while we're here, just to try and tighten up the rest of the suspension, we might as well replace these as well. So while I order those and wait for them to turn up, I might as well crack on with the stereo. Now this stereo is very much plug and play, but it doesn't hurt to have a quick look at the instructions, because although they are bijou, they are quite comprehensive. What I'm really trying to establish now is kind of where I'm going to route everything and what I need to kind of think about when I'm getting, oh, look at that, perfect timing. Talking of wiring, here are my DAB Plus receiver, but also an extra bit of wiring room. The reason that's helpful is because what came with the kit is very well labelled, but of course I'm going to have to connect everything up individually. This way I can plug it into the stereo and just plug it straight into the T5's own wiring loom, which is brilliant. Now, as I was saying, I've basically got a few things I've got to work out how to connect up. Obviously the camera is pretty obvious, it's going to go somewhere right at the back, and then I'm going to actually have to connect it up with this extension lead, but then you've got another wiring part, which is obviously going to connect up either with perhaps the reversing lights or maybe the power down that way, or maybe even a switch. I can turn it on and off as I kind of decide. Now also I've got the GPS, that's going to have to go somewhere where it can see satellites, so probably right at the front, probably at the bottom on the dashboard. Also could do with the ground plane, so that I guess there's enough metal in the dashboard hopefully to serve that purpose. I've then got two MP3 connections or USB connections, so one will be for the MP3 player, one I think is for the memory for this device, and both of those probably want to live in the glove box. I've got to think about that. And then of course I've got our hands-free microphone there. Now the thing with this is of course the cabbie is quite loud, so I want to have it very, very near me, but then to route it from the centre of the dash sort of underneath where the steering wheel is and stuff, where all that kind of spinning stuff is, might be a bit messy. It's also quite hard to get your hands in there from previous experience, and then I need to go up all over to the top. So if I can go the other way, it might be easier, but it might not reach, so I have to think about that as well. And of course it's going to connect into here, and even though I haven't got an amp and loads of big speakers, I'll be using this bit of wiring loom. That'll connect into there nice and easily, and it can just live in there until I want to upgrade further. But I just do need to think about how these things are routing. So I think the first thing I'm going to do is take out the glove box, because there's also some wiring in there, which I actually had there from ages ago, which I want to kind of remove as well before we start going any further. So we'll start there, and then I can then route everything and then work out how it's all going to clip in and work perfectly first time. Right then, with the glove box out of the way, I can now think about routing some of my wires. The first one being for the GPS. Now the little GPS unit has to sit that way up, not upside down, and obviously it wants to see as much of the sky as possible, so I'm going to put it right at the front of the dashboard underneath the screen, and then that way it has the best vision. But one of the things to make it much better is to have a good ground plane. Now normally on an older car you'd have a whole load of metal in the dashboard, that'd be fantastic. Obviously when it's on the back of your vehicle, like one of those little shark fins, again got a fantastic ground plane. Because there's no metal in the dashboard at all, it's all plastic, I figured actually, I just found a little bit of scrap aluminium, so I'm just going to use that, and that's just going to help reflect the radio waves to make sure that this has the best chance of seeing the satellites and telling me where to go. I'm just going to pop it in just like so. Lovely. Now I haven't got a lot of room. I'm just going to try and thread this cable. There's a gap I can see just through. Really careful not to try and pull the end off, but we've done it. Look at that. So we now have our end through. What a faff. So this is now going to live. And then I'll put some double-sided sticky on the back. So basically we're going to, hopefully it's going to sit around like so and chat to those satellites and give me excellent direction. Fab. And this end will be threaded through here to the stereo. Now, our microphone, hopefully, is going to be a lot easier than fitting that GPS unit. I mean, obviously, I want to get it in the right place. I want to make sure I had a ground plane, but trying to thread that through was a little bit of a faff, it's got to be said. So hopefully this will be a lot easier, but I've got to take another piece off the car. I've got to remove this kind of coving here off the side of the A-pillar. Right then, so I have got my little microphone. Also, I'm going to start by putting the plugging in end all the way into the depths of the dashboard here. Make sure I've got enough room. It's just going to sit across the top there. It's going to come out here somewhere and then drop down in there. So hopefully I can whiz it through there somehow. So about there, give or take, a little bit of room to move. And then very handily use these original clips just to hold it in place. We're going to just thread it up there like so. It's going to reach about there, which is brilliant for the passenger, but not so great for the driver, particularly when, as I said before, the cab is actually quite a loud space to be. So I'd need probably about another metre, I guess, give or take, or I could thread it through the back of the dashboard or underneath it and then back out the other side. But I think really, to be honest, because it's easier to access it from this side, I might just get an extension. It is, after all, just a 3.5mm sort of mono plug, if you like, so I can just get an extension. That'd be nice and easy. And then while I've got the A-pillar exposed, while I wait for that to turn up, I'll just crack on with our DAB Plus receiver, because that needs to be attached to the metal and also the glass. And ideally, it wants to be away from the driver. So normally you would put it either in the wing mirror, of course, as Volkswagen do, or you could just make sure that, you know, the place where you're not going to have too many people to absorb all those radio waves. So I think I'm going to put it around here somewhere. So let's try that. With a DAB or DAB Plus receiver, the best solution is always to go with one of those shark fins on the roof of your vehicle, because you end up with a fantastic ground plane, and of course it's unobstructed view of all the radio waves it's going to be receiving. Also, sometimes they're actually coupled with an FM receiver and also a GPS unit as well. So it's a great idea, but of course you do have to drill a hole and then run all the cabling all the way through. So on this occasion, I'm going to try the alternative solution, which is a windscreen based aerial, in fact glass based. You can put it anywhere on any of your windows really, and the idea is to go as high up as you possibly can without actually touching the frame of your window. But also there's a couple of things you have to worry about. You've got obviously the aerial bed itself, but also you've got the kind of the ground contact as well. So that contact has to actually attach to somewhere on the metal structure of the vehicle, and obviously it needs to have a really good earth sort of grounding. So if you've got paint in the way, you need to actually scrape that away. Now there is a bit of metal just there, which might actually have a really good earth connection to the battery, which will be really interesting. I'll just test that in a second, but I've still got to somehow get this to attach to that, or if it doesn't reach, it's going to have a little bit of metal or sort of paint cleaned off just to make sure that there is a really, really good earth. Now, the other thing you need to think about is also the orientation. It's designed, it's tuned to be vertical, so it could be that way or it could be that way, but it has to be vertical, otherwise you're just going to get a terrible, terrible reception. So obviously it's going to sort of sit, I guess, somewhat like that or like that, depending on which way around I've got things, and it's all sticky backed as well, so it will just stick onto the glass. So I need to clean it first, and then I'll check for an earth and then work out exactly where it's going to go. Good stuff. Right then. You can see it's kind of a coppery foily bit on the back.
We can tidy that up once we've got the glove box back into position. I'm going to probably tape a few things down as well. Also got to get the camera feed in from the rear and the extension for the microphone, but it's coming together.
Right then, so next up is our reversing camera. The one that came with the kit. It's very tidy, you know, bolts on and can be adjusted relatively easily, but I think we could do slightly better. So I've just been on eBay again and managed to find this. So it's a slightly tidier package. It actually comes obviously just with the one mounting hole, the bolt on the back, which makes it a lot easier. And you know, it's just slightly sort of better put together. I think it's an aluminium casing and everything's adjustable. There's a little tiny grub screw on the side there, and that's how you kind of lock everything in place. And you can decide where you want your image and also which kind of image you want. That's kind of handy. So then I was thinking the best thing to do, the tidiest place to put it, would be on our sort of number plates around. Obviously it just sits on the back of the door like so. So then I can either have it sort of underneath like so, but then of course you're going to see that as a sort of a silhouette against the number plate perhaps, so maybe not quite so tidy. And I thought the alternative, I could just run 90 degrees the other way and just have it sort of somewhere on the end there. And of course that also means, just because underneath here I haven't got a lot of room there, so it has to be slightly further along, whereas on the end here it's going to be slightly closer to the tow bar, less parallax, more accurate alignment, and I think then it's going to look very nice because it'll be very tidy from the rear end as well. So, just have to drill a hole. Look at that. Super smart, loving it. Cool.
So everything is either stuck or bolted into place. The cables are routed, and so all we have to do now is connect everything to the back of the stereo and make everything go, except I've got one major thing to overcome before I can do that. And that's to do with the wiring. Unfortunately, Volkswagen in their infinite wisdom never got round to actually fitting a 12-volt ignition feed to these connectors. Don't know why they didn't do that. They had obviously some other clever idea, but it means that when you try and fit a DIN stereo, it doesn't work. So they were a bit dim about their DIN. Now, the reason I need that sort of ignition feed rather than the constant feed is that the stereo needs to know when to turn on or off. And obviously if it's just got a permanent feed all the time, it's always going to be on even if it's kind of asleep, which means it's always going to be trying to connect to your phone, which of course is going to flatten the battery. That means even if you're just near the workshop, say near the van, it's just going to kill your phone, which is not very good at all. So I do need to find a feed. Now I could find the ignition feed obviously from the ignition switch. That would be very obvious, quite easy to find as well. And once you've removed enough trim, you can actually get to the back of it. You can follow some of the wires, put in a little sort of tracer, sort of fuse it together somehow. And then after a little bit of soldering and stuff, put a fuse in, job done. But equally, we could go down to the fuse box themselves. All the fuses sort of live underneath at the sort of the bottom of the dashboard here, so they're relatively-ish easy to get to. You have to remove an awful lot of interior trim, but you can get to them. But then it's picking the right fuse and the right sort of connection. And then, of course, if you solder it, then it makes it a bit more permanent. I've just found recently a really cool little product, very simple thing, which is going to make that a lot easier. So I've ordered one of those. And I'm also waiting still for the extension for my microphone cable. So at the moment, I'm a bit stuck on the stereo. Maybe I should look at the suspension for a bit.
Now I can't wait to actually start using that stereo in anger on the open road. It'd be fantastic. But let's have a think about the front suspension now. Obviously, I know I need to replace this because it's obviously looking kind of a little bit, oh my word. Ha-ha! Perfect timing again. It's amazing. So now we've got our new tops, and what's interesting actually is that they are, well, one would say probably straight away actually pretty much identical, but that's interesting. So they haven't modified that bit, but I think they have potentially modified this. There's been a couple of sort of revisions, if you like, so you can see that's actually quite a bit different, and it's obviously less complicated on the other side as well. So this is the new bearing, which is actually bigger for one thing, so you can see that actually that bit there is much bigger than that part, which is kind of interesting. And that just pops onto there like so. That should then pop onto there like so, and then our brand new bit of rubber should then pop onto there like so. So if I put all that back together again, for example, you can see there's quite a marked difference in the height of our suspension. Now bear in mind, of course, you've got these little sort of bits here. So of course they're going to go up and down. That's going to adjust our height. We've got quite a lot of thread there, well, a couple of inches at least. So, but it's definitely going to be a lot lower than it was when it started. So I guess I better start putting everything back together again. And of course, because the spring is actually got some adjustment, of course it's not actually under as much pressure it was on this one, so I can just wind it up once it's all bolted up properly. But that is going to look pretty smart, I think. Let's hope it works a treat. Our brand new adjustable front strut is now in position. Everything has been bolted up. Just need to go around and torque everything properly. And then once I've done the other side, I can then also fit the new drop links. But you can see, just comparing where the drop link is trying to get to and where the hole is now, that actually this side is now about nearly 2 inches lower than the other side. So it's going to have a whole new purpose and hopefully much, much better handling as well. Now, if you're trying to undo a difficult bolt maybe on your suspension, I've got a great little tip. Obviously, you want to use some penetrating fluid. XCP is absolutely fantastic, but I've got a great further tip from a mate called Nigel Irving, and he was suggesting that I should actually get myself some of this, some toffee. Really, only just actually, not to eat, but for the toffee hammer that comes with it. And you don't even really need to use a toffee hammer, just anything metallic, little tiny, small kind of planetary hammer or something. But basically, the idea is you go in there and you actually agitate the thing you're trying to get penetrating fluid into, and that vibration actually helps the molecules of the XCP, for example, just get all the way into those threads and help unseize it. So a really, really useful tool, and you get free toffee. Now, having just cleaned off all the excess penetrating fluid, the next thing to do, before I go any further, it's not entirely vital, but I always like to put a little bit of red rubber grease and just pop that just around the shaft, and that's going to stop, always grease your shaft, it's going to stop weird noises coming from your suspension, squeaks and such like, so hopefully that'll make all the difference. And you can't use petroleum grease on the rubber because it's going to degrade it over time and make it actually worse. And if you have urethane joints, you might want to use some kind of silicone grease, which again is not actually going to affect the urethane. Well, our T5 is definitely having a proper suspension overhaul. So now I've fitted these new bushes on the anti-roll bar. You can hear there's no clunking,
There's no sloppiness, which is wonderful, and there's no squeaking either thanks to that lovely red grease. So I'm just going to pop our new anti-roll bar drop link in position. Once I've done all that up, all the rest of the suspension is actually bolted up, except unfortunately, because this is a modern vehicle, even though it is 20 odd years old, of course it was built on a conveyor belt, if you like, it was on a production line, and of course nowadays they tend to use stretch bolts, which means I have to replace all the bolts I've played around with, or messed with, undone and put back in again. I'm going to have to replace them with stretch bolts and torque them up properly, because otherwise they're just going to fall out. And it unfortunately means that all these kind of bolts, even the hub nut here, is a one-use item, which is a bit crazy and does add to the expense. But we've got to do it properly, otherwise the suspension is going to fall apart. That would not be good. Right then, so my bolts are now in finger tight, so I need to torque them up, and then I need to actually then carry on, which is kind of, that's where the stretching happens. So on this particular van, because it's less than 3,000 kilograms in gross weight, then I've got to go up to 75 newton meters of torque, and then I've got to carry on another 180 degrees. If it was over 3,000 kilograms, then it'd be 150 newton meters of torque, and then I have to carry on for just 90 degrees. Now to do this, you could obviously use a conventional torque wrench or something, but I've got a really cool product we're now stocking in our store, greasedonkey.com, and it's from Sealy. And it's basically an electronic kind of torque wrench, but obviously you can see, obviously you've just got like a 3/8 sort of end, or sort of basically male and a female, so then essentially what I can then do is click on any socket I've got, whether long or short, whatever, with an extension if I need to, and then I can have any kind of thing to spin it around on the back. And then I can turn it on. It's got two modes, it's got trace and P2P, or kind of peak basically. So the idea is that with the peak, it'll actually kind of start bleeping and warning you're getting close to your main thing, and then with trace it'll just give you a kind of constant reading of what's going on. So I've got it in trace at the moment, so let's just see what's happening. So I'm just going to wind it round. You can see that the numbers are getting bigger and bigger. I'll make it a bit easier to see what's going on. Bit more, bit more, a bit more, a bit more. 70. There we go. So I've got to my 75 newton meters of torque. So now the top one is at the right torque, but I've now got to add a turn of 180 degrees. But you can see it's quite a handy little thing. And this one is just going to beep, a bit like the click on a normal torque wrench. That's warning me. Oh, there we go. So that's got to 75 newton meters of torque. And so then the bottom one is also ready now to do 180 degrees of further turning. And that's what's actually stretching the bolt, which is basically holding it in place. And that's why my suspension is going to stay where it's supposed to be. So it's a really cool little thing. So you should buy it immediately. Click the link. So I've just marked on the socket as well, so I know what I'm doing. I'm just going to settle it by bouncing up and down. So let's have a little look and see what we've got here. So we had about 13 centimeters before. I would say that's about 9 centimeters, give or take. So we've probably lost about 4 centimeters on the rear. And it may well settle more. And of course, obviously, until I put a big load in here, I don't know how much more I want to lower it before I actually get to the kind of stance. But obviously, if it's this tall at the back, that's quite nice. It's got loads of adjustability. Let's have a look at the front. Oh my word. Well, that is definitely a lot lower. So it's got a bit of a hot rod rake, I would say. Looking at that, we're looking at, well, 6 centimeters. So it's basically half the height that it was
Now obviously when I'm in it, it's probably going to go down a little bit, but then of course when I've got a load in the back, it's also going to go down in the back a little bit. So I think what I might do is leave it like it is for now, drive it around a bit, let it settle, and have another little look. But I'm liking it, it's proper hot rod. Well, hot rod-ish. V-dub hot rod. Right then, so the wheel nuts are done up to 180 Newton meters of torque. And finally, we have to do up the nut that holds in the drive shaft, or the hub nut. And that needs to be torqued up to 200 Newton meters of torque. Then it has to be backed off 180 degrees, and then have to be tightened back up again to 200 Newton meters of torque. Nice and simple. So now the suspension is on the ground, all done up and under load, we can do up the top nuts. They need to be 80 Newton meters of torque. Gloves off for the next job because it's going to get sticky. Now so far, the suspension and the stereo have been quite involved, but thankfully upgrading our little wind deflectors here is going to be a nice easy job, partly because half the job is already done. Now the new part that I got from eBay, you can see here, is black and opaque as opposed to clear and covered in green stuff. It also fits on the door in a slightly different position. It just sits rather nicely just all the way along the contour of the door, so it's going to be nice and easy to position as well. And to actually attach it in place, all I've got to do is actually use some sticky tape, which is rather wonderful. So all I need to do is prise off the original one here and then stick on the new one. It really is as simple as that, and it does look very smart. To the other side. Well, these new wind deflectors are looking very stylish, and now they're stuck on. I need to leave them 12 hours before I kind of use the van, 24 before I go really fast, and 48 before I go through a car wash, which, let's face it, never actually happens. So now in this box, we have the 2 wires I need to actually finish the installation of the new stereo. So let's crack on. So we've got our meter-long extension. First thing to do is just connect it up. Nice positive connection there, which is good, because what I'm worried about is, of course, it just dropping apart, the rattling on. I think there's no worries of that. And then I'm just going to keep pulling it all the way through, because ultimately, the more we have, the more room we have, the better. So it's obviously going to connect there. Now, it's obviously going to connect also into this bit here. So we've got these kind of wires there. Like so all that's going to go into the back of the stereo. We'll actually cut off the back of the clip just to make it a bit more flush, which is nice. And I'm pointing it right at me, so it's going to have the best possible chance of actually hearing what I'm saying over the noise of the van. But bear in mind, it's not just for phone calls, it's also for voice controls of the Apple and Android systems on our new stereo. Lovely. Right then, we are on the home straight, which is very exciting. All I need to do now is find an ignition feed for my stereo, and I can put everything together and to see how epic it is. So, ordinarily on a T5, for some reason, as I said before, Volkswagen didn't bother to put a 12-volt ignition feed into their sort of stereo area. So I've got to find another one. If you look online, there's tons of different suggestions, but a lot of them involve kind of splicing in a new wire in one way or another. But I've found this really, really cool product, which makes it just so much easier. It's just this. Really, really simple. So basically, that, you can see, is kind of like a piggyback fuse essentially. So you basically take your fuse out, pop that into where the fuse used to be, then you put that old fuse into this other socket here, and then the second socket then gives you a feed, which is also fused. So you don't mess with the first fuse circuit, you don't mess with the second one, you've actually got a fuse, but also you don't have any faffing about. The only thing I'm going to have to do for this is probably drill a little hole, but other than that, it's all ready to go. And how awesome is that? Where were these 20 years ago? Really, really cool idea. Now, what I've been doing is having a little look around on kind of the wiring diagram. It looks like on the fuse box, number 14 is the top right, the 30 amp fuse, and basically it powers the fan and the AC and all that kind of stuff. So if I turn on my fan, in fact, I turn on the ignition first of all, so that's the fan on there,
and of course it goes off when the ignition goes off, which is exactly what I'm looking for. And also, my figuring is, because it's a 30 amp fuse, because it's designed to run all that, it can spare a couple of little amps just for my stereo. And okay, there may possibly be a little bit of an issue with noise, but I guess it's on the circuitry anyway, so let's hope that modern electronics can handle all of that. So my cunning plan is literally just to pull out fuse 30, pop that in. I'm just going to drill a tiny hole, because of course you have got the little kind of cup holder ashtray thing going on there, so I'm going to have to pull that out the way, and that is a bit of a faff because you've got to remove kind of bits of the sort of bodywork either way to get that out of the way, but just to feed the wire up. I might be able to get away with it. I'll try, do it without, but obviously it's quite tight in there, but what you don't want to do is go up with the wire, because then of course that's going to go exactly where that little drawer is. So I'm hoping to go to the right, then up, into the stereo, and then we're there. So fantastically neat, very happy with that. Oh, I can reach it, which is brilliant. Oh, look at that. Oh, that is such a fantastic, tidy solution. Very chuffed with that. Where was that? As I said, 20 years ago. There we go. So, with that feed, theoretically now I can just plug that into there, like so. And then, when I can start connecting everything else up on the stereo, we should have life on ignition. Obviously I'm going to need to tidy the wiring up at some point, but I think for now we'll just pop it into place with that. I want to see if it's actually going to work and how awesome it's going to look. So, oh yes, mustn't forget these little chaps here. So. Clickety click, click, click. Oh, it's looking pretty good actually, isn't it? That is looking quite tidy. Oh, like this. Okay, so, and it looks like it's supposed to be there, which is also quite nice. So let's turn the ignition on and see what happens. Oh, it's come to life, look at that, it's fantastic. Oh, that's very exciting. So all I have to do now is things like pair the phone and other bits and pieces. But I guess the next thing is just see if our reversing camera works. So, put it into reverse. Well, it's working, which is great. I need some adjustment. Back in a second. Look at that, that's pretty good actually. I may tweak it a bit more, but I think I'm pretty happy with that for now. I can see the tow bar beautifully. I can see whatever's behind me as well, so I know what I'm not going to reverse into. So I'd argue that is working a treat. Well, now we know the camera works, of course, the last thing to do in here is to take off the protective cover. Wonderful. So then, I reckon the stereo is looking pretty good. Let's see what the van drives and handles like, and also what those wind deflectors are like. Straight away, absolutely loving it. It feels tighter, feels kind of more pert, the suspension, definitely less clunks. In fact, no clunks, which is amazing. There's no squeaking, there's no unpleasantness. It's very good. Now the engine was always really peppy on this little T5, but now the suspension is lovely and taut to match. It's a little bit firmer, obviously, as you'd expect, but that's kind of nice. So diving into roundabouts, going around corners, now even more of a joy. My little T5 also looks much more purposeful than it did before, which can't be a bad thing at all. So I think all in all, the suspension upgrade is a success. Let's have a little look at our wind deflectors. They definitely seem pretty good. And now they're even, which is nice as well. So same sort of noise, but not very much from both sides. So that's also a bit of a success. I think the main thing actually is the stereo. The stereo is really rather wonderful. So obviously the fact that we've now got some music and can choose tunes from my phone other than from the CDs, that's good. But also the reversing camera, already really in love with that as well. It's going to make towing so much easier, or at least hooching up with trailers and stuff. So fantastic stuff. All in all, an absolute triumph. With eBay, you can find the right part at the right price. Shop tuning and styling parts on eBay and get 20% off until the 30th of November.